Sam Oakley here from MMA UK, and I'm here with MMA Junkies, Danny Segura. You may know him from his own YouTube channel as well. How are you today, Danny? Thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you for having me, man. I'm doing well,
All right, cool. So you're based in Brooklyn, am I right?
Yep, correct.
What are things like in New York now? Everything's been crazy for a few months, so things improving over there, or?
Yeah, things definitely improving. So right now we're like in the state has issued sort of certain orders where we're opening again from all these like COVID-19 lockdowns. So we're on phase two. Phase two was on Monday, so like restaurants are now open with outdoor areas. You can't go inside a restaurant, but if they have outdoor sitting, you can go to a restaurant. I went to the dentist the other day. So things like that are open. Barbershops are open, but like with only a certain amount of people in them. So slowly things are starting to go back to normal, I guess, or like the new normal.
Yeah.
But things have definitely gotten a lot better. I think, there's been maybe, to be honest, I kind of stopped tuning into like the statistics just because they got depressing for a bit. But at one point we were like averaging out like 1,000 deaths a day. Now it's like maybe it's definitely below 100. So, definitely the curve has been flattening. So things are getting better. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, it's pretty similar here in the UK. From July 4th, hairdressers and restaurants are allowed to open. So slowly but surely,
Yeah.
So being a full-time journalist, take us through what your average workday entails and how has the pandemic affected this, if at all?
Yeah, so the pandemic, obviously, for a bit, we were lucky enough, I guess, from I guess in some way we were fortunate that the UFC, because it's a sport that doesn't, it's not a team sport, you can get away with having events, back a little bit sooner than other teams that involve, football or anything else. That involve larger squads. So on that end, for a bit it was weird not having any events to cover. So we were just covering basically like day-to-day news. I think at the time John Jones had gotten in some trouble, right? He got a DUI. So things like that, just regular news stories, like we were still covering, but our week in and week out of the grind of fight week was gone. So it was a little strange, not gonna lie. And sports have been hit, as you may know, or if you've been tuning into sort of the MMA scene as far as media goes, a lot of people have lost their jobs and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess it's a little bit of a weird space. But as far as the day to day, at this point, we got fights back, so it's basically just business as usual for the most part. It's just now the storylines have changed a little bit because of COVID. And you start covering certain things with sort of that angle and also with that eye as well. It's definitely added like a new layer to just coverage in general, and it goes across anything.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that MMA's come back in such full force and boxing hasn't, because boxing, of course, not a team sport, but there's less emphasis on like having a full stacked card. Like I can't tell you a single fight on the undercard of Wilder Fury or anything like that. So it's just interesting that hasn't seemed. There's some boxing here and there, but it hasn't seemed to get back on the tracks the way that the UFC has.
Yeah, they have different things to work with. Boxing's been back already for what, like a week or two.
Yeah.
But we haven't seen those big fights, and we know those like big boxers get a piece of the gate, so
Yeah.
without hosting events, without crowds, it's just like, it's been an issue, like, what about that money, right? Whereas, UFC fighters, they just show up and fight. They don't really see the gate anyway. So for them, it's the same thing. And, boxing is, the UFC has more control over their fighters. So they're able to do more. They're able to manage things a little better as far as, a quick return. And also, like, props to the UFC because, the control, maybe that's like a topic of its own. But they are a well-oiled machine. They've always been. If you compare like how boxing events run versus UFC events run, at least from coverage perspective, like the UFC is so much smoother. They got a recipe down.
Yeah.
They're super organized. I mean, the way they work is incredible. So yeah, I mean, you need a solid team to put on events during these times for sure.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like in the UFC, there's not that many dream fights because you tend to just get the fights you want. Whereas in boxing, there's an endless list of fights that people want to see that it just never comes to fruition. Which kind of ties into my next question. Obviously, with being a respected journalist like yourself, there's a responsibility to be well informed about what you're talking about. So, what was that process like in the early part of your career? Like making a conscious effort to educate yourself, not just on the intricacies of the fights themselves, but on the fight business. How the media works in relation to MMA specifically. Like, what was that like early on?
Yeah, it takes time. That's something that college doesn't get you ready for, or uni, right? That's what you guys say it over there.
That's what we say.
Yeah. So it just takes time, man. Like obviously, you can learn some things as a fan about like the sport and even how like media works a little bit. But it's a whole other thing once you're like covering it full time, and that'd be your job. So it does take some time, and it's really. I feel like it's just like anything. It's trial and error. You start doing something, and you look at other people, and you get advice from. Especially when I started, I got a lot of good advice from people that were already in the industry for quite some time. So for me, it was important to like have people to mentor me. Pick certain people that you trust, certain people that that are invested in your growth and want to see you do well. And I was lucky enough to have a few of those people along my way to help me out and sort of show me the ropes. And if I ever had any doubts or any questions, I could go to them, and they would always back me up. So yeah, that's important. I think having mentors in anything, it's key. But also, like I said, it's just a lot of it is just time and just actually doing it, right? Like just go interview someone, right? And my first interviews were horrible, but slowly but surely they got better, and it goes across anything. You just improve over time. So yeah, it's one of those things.
Yeah, cool. So one of the biggest stories right now is obviously fight to pay. Big names, John Jones, Jorge Masvidal, pretty much blasting Dana White and the UFC online. It feels like every time I check the news, that's the latest headline. And this is obviously not a news story, but what's been your biggest takeaway from this recent like outbreak of fighters being very vocal, like saying, like pointing out problems with the pay structure and things like that? Obviously, Gray Maynard got involved recently. So, what's been your biggest takeaway?
My biggest takeaway has been because, like as you said, like this is not like a new story. This is an old one, and this is one that's been brought up often and often over the years. But I'd say my biggest takeaway is how much of it is going on now. Like we've seen every now and then fighters be not happy with pay, and then eventually things get resolved. And usually, like things are not as public as they are now. So they're certainly more public now than ever. And I also think there's more of it, which is interesting, especially among the top talent, which usually those guys were comfortable with their pay. It was usually sort of the lower end guys or a guy that got kicked off, from the UFC roster, and then they would start, sort of bad mouthing the promotion and opening up about pay and all that. Now we see guys that are in the promotion that are doing well and that are top stars, and we've seen a little bit of that in the past, but I feel like at the level that it is now, I don't think we've ever seen it. So there is a little bit of a different feeling this time around than others. So I guess that's my biggest takeaway. Like the amount of it, or the amount of people that have been complaining about it, is definitely new. So it's definitely brought on a new feeling with it. So, but yeah, like you mentioned, John Jones, Masvidal, Segura retired because he wanted more pay. Paige VanZant, who fights, in July 12th or something like that. She's going to test free agency because she was basically saying, I'm making $46,000 to show up, $46,000 to win. That's the same contract I had when I was 22 years old. I'm 26. So yeah, there definitely seems to be something turning. I don't know if that will lead to some change or something beyond that. We don't know, but it does feel a little bit different than the other times.
Yeah, you mentioned Paige VanZant. She's also said that she makes way more just modeling on Instagram and on Dancing with the Stars and stuff. and she's got a big name herself. So it kind of ties on to my next question. Like, do you think fighters at this level taking such a public stand will kind of force the UFC's hand to change, or do you think in the current, just craziness, everything's changing every day, the current climate we're in, do you think it will unfortunately get swept under the rug a little bit?
No, I think complaining and sort of taking that type of stance is effective. If it wouldn't be effective, fighters wouldn't use it. It depends how you use it, right? As well as your star power, your fighting style, all that. How much the UFC wants to keep you in and everything like that. And I think it could lead to some change, but like an individual change for the most part. I think if there needs to be like a bigger change, sort of like in the pay structure or fighter share revenue or anything like that, it's going to take a bigger effort, such as a union, or maybe some things in the law that permit fighters to make more money or have better opportunities elsewhere. But as far as like the current unrest that we see now, I feel like that will only really solve like individual issues. Like, for example, Paige VanZant, she's saying she's making more money on Instagram. I don't know if that's true or not. It's kind of hard to believe to me. I don't know, but so we don't know unless she shows us receipts. We won't know for sure. The Dancing with the Stars, that's a big show here in America, so I believe that. But yeah, I think, for example, if the UFC were to come up to her and be like, all right, you're testing free agency, we want to offer you a 4-fight deal, and we're going to offer you X amount of money, and that X amount of money is the amount of money that she wants. I'm sure she's going to be happy. She's going to take it, and then she's going to move on with her career. And then, I don't think she's still going to be vouching, hey, fighters need to get paid more. Same thing with Jorge Masvidal. If Jorge Masvidal would have been offered a good amount of money to fight Kamaru Usman, he would have fought Kamaru Usman. He wouldn't have sat there and be like, no, I'm not fighting because the rest of the roster is not getting paid properly. And because this is an individual sport, fighters always have that mentality across everything. So I think, again, this thing that's going on will probably address individual cases. The UFC might reach out to John Jones. The UFC might reach out to Jorge Masvidal to get him into a title fight. The UFC might, get Henry Cejudo out of retirement and offer him more money. Things of that nature. But as far as like a big picture thing, I don't know. I think there needs to be something much greater than just a few individual people complaining about pay.
Yeah. I think definitely fighters especially would have to come out in support of the roster as a whole. Like, as you said, people probably have themselves as the main interest, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, of course, but it would have to be fighters coming out, because we've seen many times journalists being bullied into silence by Dana and stuff like that. So I think if something does change, it would have to be big names like this being the catalyst for it, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my next question. Onto the UFC product itself. For all the criticisms we can throw at how the UFC has handled the pandemic, I personally thought the product has been excellent. Pretty much every card has had compelling storylines coming in, going out, as well as some great fights to back them up. So what have been your standout moments, fights, storylines, and what are you excited most about going forward?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think the UFC product, maybe it's taking a little bit of a hit. Like, we haven't seen the big stars come out yet, and a lot of that is because of the pandemic. McGregor probably would have fought this summer if it wasn't for the pandemic. So, the UFC has been impacted, obviously, by the outbreak of COVID-19, but they've done a really good job at sort of, for the most part, keeping their product somewhere along the lines of what we're used to. I do think we're seeing a little lesser high-level MMA. Like I said, the bigger stars are usually obviously the more skilled fighters. But we've also seen a lot of like washes. Like there was that one card that like the first, I think it made a record. I think it was the first 3 fights or 4 fights all ended within a minute. Not together, but individually. I think that was that UFC on ESPN 11 or 10 with Cynthia versus guy. It was like the prelim fights, like all ended super quick. And a lot of that was because all those people were, for example, Hannah Cifers was fighting out of her weight class. But because they needed a slot and she was available, she's like, F it, I'll move up in weight. There's a lot of other fighters that weren't able to make it because of, they just couldn't make it to the fight, injuries, COVID, etc. And they just had to bring a lot of newcomers in. So usually, you can get some good newcomers, right? But it's not, again, it's not the highest level of MMA. So I think the product has taken a little bit of a hit, but for the most part, we've seen some good fights, and it's been, it hasn't been anything too different. What was your question again? How the UFC has handled the pandemic?
It was giving your personal standout moments, fights, storylines. What are you excited about going forwards?
So for now, I think the biggest storylines. It's been interesting. I think what's been happening in the lightweight division, that first event, that UFC 249, that was weird. I think now it's becoming a little bit more normal, but when that was happening, there was like this weird feeling in the air, like, whoa, like, I don't know if we should be doing this, right? Like, COVID's out there. Yeah. It was weird. And then obviously the lightweight division really, what Justin Gaethje was able to do with Khabib Nurmagomedov's withdrawal, he really put the lightweight division upside down and has sort of changed the dynamic so much, to a sense that, like, you could make the argument that maybe if Tony Ferguson, I don't know, maybe if Tony Ferguson would have won that fight, maybe McGregor would have ended up fighting him. I don't know if Tony Ferguson would have had a different stance than Justin Gaethje, where Gaethje's like, nope, I just want to fight Khabib and all that. So that's been interesting to follow, and looking forward to that title unification bout with Khabib. I think Josh Emmett recently was a nice storyline to follow. It's a guy that I never labeled him as a gatekeeper, but because, like, he's a bit of a name in the division, but he's not a guy that, like Jeremy Stephens, he's not a guy that's been around for the division long enough for you to be like, all right, we know who he can beat and who he can't. Josh Emmett has had some wins where you're like, okay, this guy could be a serious contender, and then a few setbacks where you're like, okay. But again, it's a very short pool, so you don't really know exactly what to make of the guy. So I thought the Shane Burgos bout would have been a big sort of signaling if he was going to be a gatekeeper or not. Like, can you beat the top guys? Or not? Simple as that. And I think Shane Burgos is definitely a skilled guy, and he was like badly injured with a messed up knee and was able to put on that kind of performance. So I do think he could be a serious contender to the title. So that's been nice to follow. I didn't expect that from Emmett, being 35 years old, and I know he was a little bit mad at the media, but we got information, so we make the best opinion we can. Dude, you've coming off a bad injury, right? Broken orbital bone. You're 35 years old. You're fighting a guy that's on a streak, young. So, like, I don't know. What do you want us to think? Or, you know what I'm saying? But prove us wrong. What we say, it's not facts, it's opinion. So, that's been nice. And the bantamweight division too. I think that's been a nice storyline.
Yeah, that was one of mine as well. Yeah.
Division is the best division right now in the UFC. I think for the most part, you go in every division, you go, okay, top 3, maybe top 5. You go, okay, any of these guys could have the belt a year from now. The bantamweight division, literally the top 15. You can make a case that any guy in the top 15 would have a belt a year from now. I mean, O'Malley, who's to say O'Malley can't win a belt a year from now, right? The guy's looking incredible. Cody Garbrandt, Peter Yan, you still got Aldo, you got Dominic Cruz still out there. There's just so many. So I think that's also been a cool storyline. Seeing how the bantamweight division has responded to Henry Cejudo's absence. That's been cool.
Yeah, bantamweight is definitely one of my favorites, because you've got this new pool of talent. The Sanhagens, the Sterlings, the Yans. And you've got the returning Cruzes, Fabers, Aldo, who's just dropped down. We don't really know too much about him. So yeah, it's an interesting mix. I think you touched on two of mine as well, with Gaethje and Josh Emmett. Kind of ties into Gilbert Burns as well. How
Burns, yep.
Guys that everyone knew they were good. Everyone knew they were a good fighter. Just during this pandemic, just watching them not just be a great fighter, be like pretty much elite. Especially in the case of Gaethje and Burns. Like 6 months ago, if I told you that Burns would absolutely annihilate Tyron Woodley, then you might not have believed me. So
yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, and that's also been like interesting, like watching how like the pandemic, because it's changed the dynamic of the game. Certain fighters have taken advantage of that and have the best of it. So Justin Gaethje is a perfect example of it. Because of the pandemic, Khabib wasn't able to show up to the fight, so Gaethje jumped in and, you know, switched that storyline around, that sort of trajectory. Same with Burns. You know, Leon Edwards was probably going to get that fight with Tyron Woodley, right? I mean, they were scheduled to fight. Pandemic hit. Burns said, you know, I'm the guy, step up. So that's been interesting as well. We all kind of had like this roadmap in our minds of like, okay, these are kind of how things shake out, and this is what's going to happen. Then pandemic hits, and literally it took everything different directions. So that's been, yeah, I guess on an unexpected turn for sure.
It's always interesting to look back at what you thought was going to happen 2 months ago, and just see how wrong you were.
Yeah, it's been weird, and also just to predict what's going to happen like 2-3 months from now, it's also weird as well. I don't know if you've tuned into like what's been happening with like COVID-19 here in the U.S., but New York, I'll give New York props. It was a state that probably responded a little. Everyone responded late to the pandemic, but once they did, their response was strong and it was good. And even then, we still were hit pretty hard. Things were weird for a moment, but for the most part, we pretty much crushed the curve. I mean, this thing's always going to be here. You just can't get rid of it like that. But certainly, we've made it a lot better, where, you know, less people are suffering. But other states, man, like Florida, they closed like super late, and then they were one of the first to reopen. I think they had I think it was like last Friday, they had like 3,000 new cases, and I think they might, for example, like Texas might have had a day where it was like 5,000 new cases, and it just keeps rising. So it's like, okay, what's gonna happen with that? Like, we don't know. You know, people are still traveling, taking planes, so who knows what the hell is gonna happen in a month or two from now.
Yeah, it's great. I did see some graphs of like the rate of infection in different states in America, and Florida was the one. It kept. They opened things up while it was still rising. It was bizarre. Yeah, I didn't know people loved the beach that much, that they were just.
Yeah, no, Florida, dude. People are tan 24/7. I lived in Florida for a few months. For a few months. What am I talking? I grew up in Florida for like a good portion of my life. But when I was working with like a full-time in MMA, like I did manage to work there for a bit, and then I moved to New York. But yeah, in Florida, people, that's all they do. They go to the beach all the time. You know, you got the beach. You can live really far, and the farthest you have the beach is like a 30-minute drive. And that's like living pretty far from the beach. Most people are within like 15 to 20 minutes. So yeah.
Great. So this weekend we've got Poirier Hooker, which is, I think we can all agree, amazing fight. Like, it's hard to imagine a world where that fight isn't great. So, what are your thoughts on that fight? Do you have a pick?
I'm kind of split. I don't know. I think Poirier, because we know more about Poirier than we know about Hooker. We know that Hooker is a good fighter, but he's still advancing in his game. So you wonder how much can he advance in between fights. There's good enough reason to believe that he can advance or make enough advancements to be able to beat someone like Dustin Poirier. But I think that'd be like, not on the best case scenario, but I think it's possible, but I think the most likely thing is that Dustin Poirier would probably win. I mean, we know that's a proven guy. We know exactly what Dustin Poirier brings and what kind of level of fighter he can be. He might not be able to beat Khabib, but he can beat guys like Justin. He can beat guys like Eddie Alvarez. He can be pretty good guys. So I don't know if I necessarily think that Dan Hooker has the tools that Khabib has, or the tools as some of the other opponents that have beaten, Dustin Poirier. And I know MMA math doesn't always work out that way, but but I feel like Poirier should win this, and I think he's the favorite, right? Probably. So I'm leaning with him. But again, watching Dan Hooker's sort of recent rise has been quite impressive. I mean, a lot of people thought he lost that fight to Paul Felder. It was a really close fight.
Yeah.
You put Paul Felder versus Dustin Poirier together, I'd pick Poirier. So So yeah, I'm going with Poirier, but I wouldn't doubt or count out Dan Hooker in this one. He's young and he's improving, and whenever you got a guy that's on the rise like that, I mean, look at O'Malley. I didn't think he was going to do that against Eddie Wineland, and he did. So I wouldn't rule out Dan Hooker winning, but going with Poirier.
Yeah, me too. I think in recent years, Poirier definitely. Everyone knew he was great, but he proved himself as elite in that last run he did prior to the Khabib fight, of course. So, all right, final question from me. Aside from working MMA, how have you been passing the time in quarantine? Any video games, films, TV shows you've been going?
Yeah. Oh yeah, tons of video games. I play pretty much every day Call of Duty Warzone. I was playing Fortnite for a while, and then the thing with me is I get comfortable with video games. So like if I get good at a video game, like I'll stick with that. That's why I love FIFA. FIFA changes over the years, like the style of play. But for the most part, I mean the controllers are the same. If you played FIFA once, and you play you're good. So anyway, so I got comfortable with Fortnite, and then I had a bunch of friends playing Warzone. They're like, "Oh, come on, try it," and I'm like, "All right." And then I started playing it, and then just the wins felt a lot more rewarding. I guess that's like the addictive gambler in me. I don't know.
Yeah.
But certainly been enjoying that a lot. So I play that every day, pretty much. When I'm done with work, it's like good to unwind. All my friends are in the same boat, so we all have a group chat, and I just throw it out there. Hey, who's available? Sometimes I can't sleep, and it's like 2 a.m. and I just throw it out there. Hey, who's up? And I got friends in different time zones, so like somebody always replies, and we get a few games in. So playing a ton of Warzone. I should probably start reading more books.
Yeah.
But and yeah, just working, man. Just like trying to do the best work that I can and staying busy on that end. What else? As far as entertainment, yeah, and that's about it. I've watched a few documentaries and things on Netflix. I recommend Killer Mike's Trigger Warning. I don't know if it's available.
So good. It's so good.
It's so good, yeah. I'm like in the, I think like third or fourth episode, but it definitely I think I don't necessarily. Not that I don't agree with a lot of his viewpoints, because I think I do like a lot of the things that he says, but I think a lot of the things that he says is not even like even on the episode with like Cola. I don't know if you remember that. Dude, who's gonna compete against Coke? Like that's a good idea. Like don't get me wrong, and all that, but like Coke is Coke. You know what I'm saying? Like or Pepsi. Yeah. Like it's just hard to be like, oh, we're gonna reinvent Coca-Cola, like even now I'm just mentioning Coca-Cola. We're gonna invent soda or whatever, reinvent soda, and like this is like the probably not, but it does what he does do that I like is that he kind of challenges things that are set in society that we just take as a given. So for example, like the whole comparison with the Hells Angels and all that, and in the Crips, you're like, yeah, why couldn't they do the same, right? It's the same thing basically.
Yeah.
In groups. And then he challenges a lot of things like that, which it sets your mind to think about like other things or even just on the same topic, just to be like, yeah, why is this like that? And why do we just take that as this is how it is? Where, why shouldn't we be thinking about like better systems or better ways of doing things? And why are human beings like so stuck with just like one way of thinking? Like, like if this is like, you can make anything out of life. Like, like, one or two things could have changed in history and we could have been in a different society, so it's all very interesting. So I recommend it for people to watch it. And also, especially with what's going on with Black Lives Matter, I think it's important to look at the perspective of Black people in America, and obviously him being Black, I think it also points out like and being successful as well, like he very much likes to work with like everything regarding like society and like sort of what's going on in society. So like I think he like brings up a lot of interesting stuff and allows you to like take a look at things at different angles and different viewpoints.
Yeah, I think what's so great about it, obviously he's just a likable, funny guy, and I'm a huge Run the Jewels fan.
Yeah, he's hilarious. He's great.
Yeah. It does make you think about like how you can help in your community, because you know the first episode where he's living entirely black and he's only buying things from black businesses, only eating black grown food. Like obviously it was clear that that's almost impossible. Like he was miserable for the whole episode.
Yeah.
But it does show like if I can do this for 3 days, you can support one more local business than you already do. You can do that. He does things in a humorous kind of like takes things to the extreme, but it does make you think like you said, like it just makes you reconsider some basic attitudes you have towards community and society. And it's like, oh yeah, I guess I could do this a little bit better.
No, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I really like that show. It's great, and I like everything that he does, man. He does really cool stuff. But yeah, that was a very that episode was very like kind of like eye opening a little bit, because like he talks about like segregation in America, like being whites had a certain things they could do and blacks were restricted and they could only do certain things, such as like businesses. Something interesting actually, one time when I was in college, just a little parentheses, when I was in Miami, this was when I lived in Florida, I did like a little project, like a school project. It was like a little like documentary, not documentary, it was mostly like a news feature type thing. And we were doing on like Miami's protection of like historical buildings, because Miami's a city that like it's very new. I mean, Miami within itself is not a city that's been around, like New York City or all these older cities that have been around for a really long time. Miami's a fairly new city.
Yeah.
And so they're used to just knocking shit down and putting brand new buildings. And Miami has had a tough time sort of protecting some of the historical buildings and these old buildings that should be kept for history. And then anyways, so there's like this little office with this like really old lady that like I don't remember exactly what they did, but it was definitely part of like the institution in Miami by the government that like protects, that is in charge of protecting historical buildings and assigning and sort of figuring out what buildings are protected and stuff like that. And what the building was an old dentist office. And when you walk in, there's two paths, and they still have that. Well, not they don't have like the labels, but like the lady was explaining to me, yeah, this is where like whites would make a left, and they would be attended by certain dentists, and then the black people would go this other route. And you're like, whoa, that's crazy. And so you always think about it, and you're like, oh shit, that's horrible. Like that's how is that fair, right? All this and that. But then you listen to somebody like Killer Mike, and he doesn't make a case for segregation. I think we can all agree segregation is a horrible idea, but he does make like an interesting point. Is like, dude, when there was segregation and like black people could only go to black restaurants, there was restaurants owned by black people, that farms owned by black people, right? The economy, the black economy was much stronger because black people could only go to black owned businesses, so like it was a much stronger economy. Now it's not as strong, and as you mentioned there, he like try to live only off black businesses, basically consuming black businesses products for how much? It was 3 days,
something like that.
Yeah, and it was like horrible. He could barely do anything. He could barely eat at any restaurant and stuff like that. So it does like make you like realize all these things. And yeah, it's all super interesting, man. And something cool about living in New York here is that in Florida, for the most part, you get a lot of chain, like big stores, right? But here in New York, you get tons of little stores. So you have a lot of options. In some places, you might have to go out of your way to like help a black-owned business or a small, just a small business in general. Whereas here in New York, like there's little coffee shops, the little stuff that you can shop at little markets. Like you don't have to go to these big chain stores and stuff like that.
Yeah, I remember the bit about the how long $1 stays in the economy of like different dynasties. I had not once in my life considered that, so that was interesting. Yeah, I think and going back to the Cripicola one, I think it's interesting because like you said, is a new cola, made by Crips. Is that going to compete with Coke? No. But, can people in those sorts of environments, learn some entrepreneurial skills and come up with a business idea that locals can support? Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I think it is definitely a unique, humorous take he has on things, which does have some definite insight. I feel you on Warzone as well. I could never get to grips with Fortnite because it's just people who build shit so fast. Like
that was the thing. Yeah, I wasn't good at building shit. Like at some point, I got like some basic buildings done. Like, all right, I'm getting shot. Just build around me real quick.
No.
But like, I could never get into like crazy build battles. Warzone's just straight up.
Yeah, because I've been playing Call of Duty for years, so it was good to be familiar with those mechanics while still having this crazy big map like on Fortnite. I haven't actually won one yet on my own. Yeah.
On Warzone?
Not on my own, no.
Oh, for solo? I think I've won a couple. Dude, I'm pretty good. I should probably do a stream one of these days. I swear, I'm getting good. I get like wins.
Oh, definitely.
Maybe not every day, but like every other day or every couple days or something like that. Like, not on solos, with like either squads or trios or duos. Solo, I don't play much solos because I like the teamwork. But the times I played solos, like I can do it right.
Yeah, I came third on solos once, but by the time the Gulag closed, I was just in an SUV, just driving in a circle, trying to move down anyone I could see. I was way too scared because anyone at that point, that they have game, like they are gonna kill me.
They all got the perks and shit, and it's just like time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, listen, man, this is a great discussion. Thank you so much for coming on. I don't know if you have anything you want to plug, anything you want to promote.
No, man, I enjoyed this discussion as well. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And just like follow me on social. Everything's at Danny Segura TV. Same thing with my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Danny Segura TV. As you mentioned there at the beginning, I've been doing stuff on my personal YouTube channel aside from my work with MMA Junkie. So that's also something I've been focusing on in the quarantine. Now that I recall, I've just been trying to stay busy just because like. It's tough times, man. If you just listen to like a lot of the news, you can get down about like society and kind of like get a really negative outlook of where this world is headed and stuff like that. And even if it is like I would just rather have a positive attitude towards it about it. So like I've tried to keep busy, and part of that has always like been like my YouTube channel as well. Just like constantly be doing something and not just like sitting around thinking about stuff. So that's been great as well. And like you said, thank you for having me. And this was a good chat. I
enjoyed seeing the guy from Waves on your channel. I did not expect that.
Yeah, Nathan Williams. Do you know? You listen to Waves?
Yeah, I know the band. Yeah, I remember tuning in one week, and I was like, "That's the guy from Waves." Like,
yeah. He was a big fan of the MMA beat. He's a huge MMA fan. Like he's a hardcore combat sports fan. He sometimes hits me up and be like, "Oh, did you watch this like PBC boxing?" I'm like, "Oh." And he consumes a lot of combat sports. He's a huge fan, and he was a fan of the MMA beat. And then I don't know how that like friendship started, but he's a cool dude. And like we just followed each other on Twitter, and then we know obviously the MMA beat came to an end. And we just stayed in contact. And then one day I'm like, "Yo, would you be down to like talk fights with me?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm down." So we've already done a few videos about that. But yeah, he's a cool dude, great guy, and great music as well. I'm a fan of his music too.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, man.
Yeah, thank you, man.
All right, thank you so much.
All right.
See you.